Hello and welcome to Thrive Lansing, Kansas. It's our podcast, and I'm Ken Miller. I'm the Public Information Officer for the City of Lansing, joined by Joshua Gensler, my partner in crime, and he's the Director of the Community and Economic Development here for the city. Today we have a special guest, and we are hopefully going to have a video component to this, and you'll know it when you see it. Wave, everybody. Yay. There you go. All right, our guest today is somebody that's well known to both Joshua and I. That's Harland Russell, and he is a former city council member with the City of Lansing. He is currently the Director of Marketing and Business Development at Atlas Land Consulting. Harland, welcome for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
You are the first victim in our video endeavor here for our podcast.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
So
I'll apologize in advance. My allergies have been kind of flared up today and yesterday, so I'll try to keep the hacking to a minimum.
All right. Well, let's get to it. We won't keep you here any longer than you need to be. All right. So really, you've helped guide Lansing from both sides of the table. I mentioned you were a city council person here, city councilman for the City of Lansing. We were having some conversations off camera a little bit ago, and we were trying to figure out, I know you and I crossed paths, I as an employee, you as a councilman, I think from 2006 to 2009, meaning that you came on the council. You've been on the council for 16 years before you left. So that would have been mid-90s.
I believe that's correct. It's funny, I lose track of dates in my past, and I'd like to pretend that that's because I'm always looking forward. So I keep my wife's birthday in the brain, and I keep our anniversary and the two kids' birthdays. Past that, I'm pretty lost.
So back in the 90s, what made you decide to run for city council?
Sure. Probably an overwhelming sense of community that came from my family. My grandfather, way back when, was on the school board in Lansing. Fast forward to my father, who also did, I think, about 8 years on the school board, but also was on the city council. Actually was the mayor of Lansing for a short period of time. So I had always seen, at least in the house, a model of community service. My father was also very involved in the Lansing Lions Club, so just saw a lot of investment in the community, and it was important to me. And so that's what led me in. It's interesting the way I got into public service. I was asked to be on a construction review committee for the then new elementary school on Ida, and was meeting with a committee of people with then the facilities director, Dennis Johnson, and we were reviewing construction on the site. And in that period of time, then council member Ken Ketchum came to me and said that there had been an opening on the council that happened within weeks of the election. And so I was actually put a resume together, interviewed by the council, did about 3 years, 11 months of that first appointed term, and then was elected successfully 3 times after that.
All right, so we've established that you were on the council for about 16 years. During that time, and again, I was there for 3 of those years, but talk about the accomplishments that you remember most vividly during your time on the council.
Absolutely. I had to kind of cut my list off because I felt like that was a very active period of time for the community.
Yeah, definitely.
I take a little bit of pride of maybe establishing the position that led us to be here today. I felt like I was very instrumental when we got the KDOT award to do basically the Main Street redevelopment project. I advocated for a community relations officer in that, and at that point you were hired to do that. I got a lot of feedback through my constituency of what a great job you were doing. I advocated to the city manager at the time, hey, let's find a place for Ken and not let him go, and bring him on as the public information officer. And I think you've excelled in that role. So thank you for allowing me to be here and say that.
Great. You're getting all this, Josh.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Good. All right.
And we'll pass any money back and forth later. The wastewater treatment plant expansion was definitely just a monumental thing in
early
the community.
2000s, if I remember
correctly. And it was really, it's kind of one of those calls you don't want to have as a council member. Right. I remember Tony Zell was very new to the job at the time, and he'd called council members down and showed us what they called a TAC chart, which is supposed to have a little mountains and valleys around a circular chart that shows you the flow through the plant, and you turn those charts on, and the the peg went to the outside of the chart and went all the way around, which showed that it was operating past permitted capacity, or it was past capacity, but within permit at the time.
Right.
But we were in a very short window, so the council had to act quickly. And I just remember the teamwork that required, not only of the city, but of the Public Works Department, the consultant that was ultimately selected to bring a capacity to that plant that I think really helped springboard Lansing's growth in that period. The building we're setting in was a building that the city was able to purchase, I believe, from the Greenemeyer family at the time.
Yeah.
And repurpose
2009.
it. Yeah.
Yep.
And repurpose that for the community library, for public works, and for community development. So it was very, we did a number of walkthroughs through construction through that project. So again, some of those things don't have all of maybe the glory that you'd want to have, within a city, because a lot of times those are projects that are occurring behind the scenes. But probably one of my proudest accomplishment was being involved in the early idea of going out west of town and purchasing the ground for Ken Bernard Park.
Yeah.
And so I think we're all definitely seeing the benefits of that today. So,
And all three of those things, hard decisions to make, but even now we're still not at capacity for our wastewater plant. We still have excess capacity, about 50% that we can bring on more development. Kenneth Bernard is a great park for us to be able to utilize now and in the future. And, I like my office, so, it's a good space.
Right.
It's a good space. Lots of flexibility
Absolutely.
for us. Hey, so what do you think about, there's a lot of conversation between the public and what the public wants right now and what the city government, I don't know, provides maybe.
And can do.
And can do. Yeah.
Right, right.
So what do you think is the biggest 2 or 3 misconceptions about the government's role in development?
Oh, wow. In development, I'll back up a little bit. I think generally speaking, the public understands the role of government. I think one of the things, and I don't think we're alone in this locally, but people don't sometimes understand which entity of government is responsible for a certain area of their life, so to speak, whether it be the city, the school district, the county, the state. And so I think there gets to be a lot of misunderstanding of that. I mean, I can go back and think of a time that the school district was having some funding issues and they cut busing within a 2.5 mile radius of the schools, and it was going to require the kids to have to walk. And unknowingly, I mean, one thing that I would say about Lansing city council meetings back in the day, maybe true still today, if there's nothing controversial really on the agenda, it's a lonely meeting. A lot of times, and so we were in a time frame of just a lot of lonely meetings, and I think that's a good thing for a city. That at least you would feel that the public was trusting what you were doing. And I remember showing up for a meeting one time, and just the council chambers just overflowing with people, and I quickly got my book out, and I'm like, what did I miss in here that's on the agenda tonight? Well, I didn't miss anything. The school district had cut the bus funding. And there was a large populace of the electorate that came out and wanted to know what we had to do with it. And unfortunately, that was nothing we could do with.
Yeah.
We tried to make some lemonade in the fact that we mobilized the staff and I believe a local contractor to get some sidewalks put into place to at least make routes that we knew were going to be heavily traveled by kids to school, get sidewalks put in place for that. So that was just maybe a misunderstanding of the fact that we as a city didn't have any influence over what the school district was doing within their budget, but we certainly tried to use it as an opportunity to make it better.
It's funny you bring up, people maybe not understanding who is responsible for what in terms of government entity. We see that a lot with taxes.
Yeah.
Everybody assumes the city raises your taxes. That's the mantra,
Right.
And if you look at the property tax pie chart, city's not the biggest slice of pie there, So we won't go into that. There is a connection article about that coming out, though.
Okay. Awesome.
I'll say that.
And I will say on the aspect of the economic development, it is a big puzzle that's often difficult. One of the things that I see maybe out in the community the most is maybe a feeling or an understanding that, and if we wanted a Panera Bread, for example, that we could get on the phone, call Panera Bread, and they would come to Lansing. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way.
Right.
And I can speak from some personal experience in my role in the commercial development and industrial areas. I had a client one time that was development manager for Kohl's, and we were doing some retrofit work on Kohl's facilities in the Kansas City area. And I had an opportunity to go to lunch with him and talk to him about it one time about, hey, I think Town Center was starting to come together back in those days, and I'd ask him about what would it take for Coles, to really come to the area? And he goes, well, you just simply have to fit our demographics. We're gonna put a dot on a map. We're gonna figure out the demographics. Honestly, he told me very bluntly, he said, I need people to come to my office in Menominee Falls so I can introduce them. He says, he literally made a gesture. I have a packet of submittals from cities all across the United States that all fit the same demographics. And so that really speaks to the relationship side of economic development. So on the other side, I think sometimes not understanding how much work goes on behind the scenes before a project becomes public and then enters the actual planning process. So there's a little bit of confusion there about even the rezoning process. Rezoning doesn't approve a project. Rezoning allows a project to move forward with the defined use. And then the planning process starts where all the traffic reports get done, the stormwater reports, and all the planning processes to make sure that the developer's adhering to development requirements. So I think sometimes there's a little misinformation out there about confidentiality. And a lot of times cities don't have an opportunity to land direct requests from developers because they usually prefer to go through like an economic development corporation. And so they can ask questions about the zoning process and things like that. And so that can sometimes tend to the thought that there are meetings being held behind closed doors and decisions being made about the development that just aren't true. Really, it's usually about what is that development process? What has the city or the community been willing to present in incentives in the past? What's the labor pool? What's the utility availability? Right. All of these questions that really need to get lined up and answered so that a developer selects a piece of property. And then once that is done, and literally maybe the ink is on the purchase contract, that they can come to the city. And so I think that's a place where we need to work on the city side and the development side with the public to get them to maybe better understand the development processes.
You're kind of dovetailing into what I wanted to ask next, and I wanted to ask both your opinion and Josh's opinion on this. And I think, Josh, we're kind of going through a cycle of that right now, but how does the city approach from a staff perspective and an elected perspective? There's a difference between managing growth, achieving growth, but also protecting the character of the city, the character that's established. Yeah. And, Harland, you've lived here longer than either of us. Right. So I think you know Lansing's character probably better than both of us. You've served as an elected official and you're in the development game. That's like juggling three balls right there. Keep the character, but grow, because if you don't grow, you die. Right. So I'll start with you, Harland. You could write a thesis on that, but give me your 90-second answer.
Sure. Yeah. Well, coming from someone who I graduated from Lansing High School, I tell people all the time, I was born in Cushing Hospital. That's no longer a hospital. So, I've been around a few rotations of the sun.
There's very few people that have like the ability to say, I'm Mr. Lansing, and I think that you're one of them.
Exactly.
Well, I appreciate that.
That's why you're sitting on this podcast.
That's humbling. That's humbling. Thank you. But I do think that it's that feeling of community and so I've seen changes in the community that a lot haven't. When I went to high school, Lansing was about 2,500 people. And you literally, I grew up in the proverbial Mayberry of riding your bike around town, and got my rear end tanned one time because I rode my bike on the other side of the highway when I probably shouldn't have when I was about 8 or 9. So, so the highway's always been there. But to a point that I remember going into a business, and it was a barbecue business. It's where La Mesa is at right now. And they had opened up, and I remember going in there and not seeing anybody I knew. And that was when I knew that the community was changing. Because it was, prior to that, you felt like you could go anywhere and see somebody,
Yeah.
So it's this idea of, we talked a lot when I was on the city council about bedroom communities. And I think there's good and bads to bedroom communities, because I think if you're a bedroom community, that means you're dependent on somebody else for your future. Mm-hmm. That means that somebody else's development is driving your ability to be the bedroom, and all of your workforce is getting up in the morning and driving out of town. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think keeping a community built and developed so that, one, we're bringing everybody along with us. And I hope that at some point we can talk a little bit about housing and why it's important to review different types of housing, and that you look for a mix of housing types in the community, so that I'm recalling, as I sat here and talk, I was door-to-door campaigning one time. and a young lady that I'd gone to church with as a child. She lived in an area of town, and she came to tears to tell me that she was afraid she wasn't going to be able to afford to live in our town because of the taxes going up. And I think as elected officials and just members of the community, we have to have that at heart and at mind, because that's not building a very good community if we're leaving people behind, or if people have to leave our community because they can't afford to be here. But it's also embracing that there's change coming. I think one of the best things an elected official could do is travel to other places. And we'll talk a little bit about that, about some of my experience traveling to other markets. But
But I think with Josh, that's primarily your job, is trying to find that balance. You're looking for projects, whether that's commercial, residential, industrial, for that matter. But you also have to keep in mind there's a history here. We've got a guy sitting next to us that's been through a lot of that history.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what you had to try to balance really in the last year and a half, 2 years, as we've been, whether it's housing, whether it's commercial development, whatnot.
Yeah, balancing the character of the city is a unique challenge. Not a unique challenge. Everybody faces that, right? But each city brings its own unique flavors and characters and people who are in the community, right? And so every city is unique, right? But we see across the nation a series of challenges facing every community, unique or not. And so trying to balance change in the community involves looking at what other people are doing, kind of best practices from across the country, and then presenting them here in Lansing to the council, to the community, in a way that we get feedback and go, well, that would work here in Lansing. That would not work here in Lansing, because at the end of the day, I'm not making the decisions on rezonings or plats or anything like that. And so it's enabling people freedom to essentially play with their land, right? And do interesting things on their land when they can. And so balancing the need for growth, because at the end of the day, what you said is true. Mm-hmm. If you don't grow, you're going to die. And trying to figure out, to your point about the bedroom community, I get the feeling from the city council and from other members in the community that we don't want to be a bedroom community anymore, right? We want to have we want retail, and we want other commercial products that we're not going to get if we don't grow, right? We've been at the size that we've been at for the past 15 years. And so we need to bring in some growth to attract both new eyes and the development community here to say there is something really cool about Lansing, right? We are a unique community. We have a lot of strong family ties to this community, and then we also have the presence of the military among others, and it just sets us apart. And so come to Lansing and see what happens.
I do want to take a short break here, and then when we come back, we'll be speaking again with Harland Russell. He's the Director of Marketing and Business Development at Atlas Land Consulting. I'm Ken Miller, and Joshua Gensler is with me. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Thrive Lansing, Kansas. It's our podcast, and Harland Russell, our former city councilman here in Lansing, and he's currently the Director of Marketing and Business Development at Atlas Land Consulting. Joshua Gensler, he is the Community and Economic Development Director for Lansing. I'm Ken Miller, PIO, Public Information Officer. Josh was just touching on kind of the balance that he has to keep in mind when he is searching out potential developments, whether that's residential, commercial, industrial. Something I wanted to get into with you, Harland, again, kind of tapping into your experience. Why, and I know you were trained professionally, you went to college and whatnot, but why go from being on the city council to really, as I understand it, really getting into the development game? You mentioned that once you got off the city council, you became a member and an active member of the Leavenworth County Development Corporation, LCDC, one of the bigger development players in the area. Talk about that transition for you, going from elected official, who then has kind of the unique experience of being a developer who the folks, the exact folks that the city is always trying to work with.
Yeah. Man, I would say it was just a convergence of worlds at the time, of getting on the council, gravitating towards public works and land planning, of course, because those are areas that I worked within every day. So I've spent a little over 40 years in commercial, industrial, mixed use developments. So I have a lot of experience there. But while I was on the council, one of the things I did was I volunteered to sit on the infrastructure committee for Leavenworth County Development Corporation, because that was a committee that was reviewing really all the infrastructure investment in the county, working on relationships and interconnectivity of what the communities are doing and the investments being made, and then how that played into economic development. Because at the basis of a lot of what we do on the attraction side of development, it's really about infrastructure and getting the infrastructure in place. Nothing could be shown stronger than the fact that the city's invested millions of dollars into a sanitary sewer project out to McIntyre area that is now looking like it's going to bear some pretty serious fruit. But so as I looked into that and then got involved with the EDC, I was approaching that 15, 16 year of being involved within the city, loved the work, went home almost every night fulfilled in what I was doing and giving back to the community, but also starting to get this profound sense of, hey, you know what? I'm a big advocate of term limits. I've kind of been here long enough. Let's get some young blood in and keep that turnover. And I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also saw it as an opportunity to go serve at Leavenworth County Development Corporation. So got a little bit more actively involved. And when I was no longer an elected official, that meant that I could serve on the board. A lot of people don't understand that economic development corporations were created initially, and LCDC follows suit, created additionally to provide a gap between the public side of the development and the public's needs, and the understanding that if a developer were to walk in your office and have discussions about development, that's all subject to open meetings. It allows developers to go directly to a development corporation and ask all those questions kind of off the record. And people say, well, why is that important? Well, it's important, and I'll just make let's say you're an ink pen manufacturer, and you have a new state-of-the-art ink pen that you want to manufacture, and you've decided you want to manufacture it somewhere in the Midwest. You're probably not going to stop manufacturing pens while you go out and start a new development process to build a facility. Right. You're probably going to reach out to a site selector, and that site selector is going to go out to EDCs across the country or within the region. You tell him you want your new pen facility to be, and he's going to ask questions. Mm-hmm. I need this many acres. What's the labor force? What's the code for how many parking cars? All of these questions about development. Yeah. All in an environment that his competitive pen maker doesn't know about. Okay, and that's just strictly making sure that you have your competitive advantage. And I think we saw that most recently in Leavenworth County with Hill's Pet Nutrition. Yep. Hill's Pet Nutrition worked with LCDC and the Kansas Department of Commerce for about a year before the project was publicly known available, or by the time that they decided to land in Tonganoxie and then go into the actual formal planning process, about a year of meetings that started in COVID. And so why that's so important that I don't know a lot of people understand, the pet food facility built in Tonganoxie is the most technologically advanced pet food production facility in the world. Completely automated. It's an amazing facility. I was privileged to be able to tour it. They wouldn't let me take any pictures, but I was privileged to go through it and experience that. So that's just kind of that transition that you have to understand.
So. I think you've touched on this a little bit in your last answer. So let's use your pen production facility here. So what does Lansing do? And keeping in mind that Lansing would probably have to work with the county, with the EDC, probably the state, but what can Lansing do, in your opinion, to make us above and beyond the most attractive spot for that pen factory to land?
There's a ton. I think that when you work with developers, to get their property entitled. So we call the process really up till you get a site that what we call pad ready. That means all the utilities are in place, that you have literally a flat pad that a building could be constructed on. The closer you can get to pad ready, the shorter you can make the development cycle. So you see a lot of People in the market will work to get the property entitled, so get it zoned correctly. Every step of that entitlement raises the value of the property. From a city standpoint, we can use McIntyre as a great example. The city invested millions of dollars in infrastructure to put sewer through there. That's an incentive. That's an investment the community made. Now being ready when the developer comes to make sure there's an appreciation for, everybody's heard it, time is money. Time is money is huge in the development business. I can remember industrial projects taking 2 to 3 years from initial conception to turning the keys over to the client. We're seeing those in the market moving so fast now that I've seen those in as little as a year, which is just a breakneck speed.
Wow.
But it's the speed at which development has to occur. So having city officials, city staff members that understand that is that. I'm trying to think, it's just being respective of the fact that sometimes if you say, I'll get back to you next week, the answer should be, I'll get back to you tomorrow. Right. Because that's the speed that everything outside is going on to make these projects happen and make them work. The communities that are the most successful at doing that are the ones winning the projects. And then the other one would be the communities that are looking at other incentive tools. And I think the city of Lansing has been very open to different incentive tools. We on the LCDC side, we use an organization out of WSU, and a lot of people don't know this, that when the pin manufacturer comes and he's asking for incentives, WSU has a department that will do an economic impact study that will actually produce a very thick report of what that incentive results in when you bring the property taxes onto the property, when you look at the resulting jobs that are created, all of the homes that potentially are required, the apartments, homes, and then the retail side of it. And so it would be very rarely that any community would go into an investment with no actual thought of what the return on that investment would be. So
that's Wichita State, right?
Yes, yeah. Yes. Thank you
for
clarification.
They every year they host a number of economic discussions across the state where they present, hey, this is what the Northeast, what we project the Northeast corner is going to do, what the Southeast and whatever. They're an immense resource to small cities, big cities in the state as well, and they do lots of good work. So you mentioned about running sewer in our case, an actual project running sewer out to McIntyre, which unlocks development. So what do you see going on with like the infill development and maybe a little bit smaller scale than say a Hill's Pet Nutrition?
Right.
What do you see going on in that space, and how can the city help to unlock that type of development?
So a lot of infill development is certainly residential, smaller scale. Mm-hmm. My career's not been based on smaller scale residential generally, but there's also a lot of infill development projects when big box retailers get out of their buildings. And, I think we're seeing some of that in what has happened in Leavenworth with the Leavenworth Plaza and now soon to be pretty much a completely vacant tract of ground. And then looking at ways to, I know Senator Klemp, I'd had a really good conversation with Senator Klemp about star bonds, lowering the thresholds of star bonds. So I think that creates an environment that as planners and developers and city officials looking for opportunities on maybe infill development where maybe some of those tools could be used. There's still all of these different incentive tools come with different requirements. And I think at the end of the day, they are looking out for the taxpayer, and they're used to understand that they can diversify tax base. One of the biggest struggles that we have in Leavenworth County right now is that when you drive in and look at our property tax base, 90% of the property taxes paid in Leavenworth County come from residential sources. So that's 11.5% tax assessment versus now 10% commercial assessment at 25%. More healthy communities, and we even have an asterisk next to that stat because in Leavenworth County, we have such a high level of non-taxable properties.
The federal
and so that does, it's, you don't want to, it hurts, but you definitely would rather have the other side of it, which is the universities and the government jobs. So we're not, please don't take any of that as being a bad thing, but you just have to recognize that we have a significant amount of land area that's not generating property tax revenue.
Right.
With that said, we in Leavenworth County would probably want to look for a mix closer to, 60-40, 65-35. That's a long way to go. Now, I will say that the data that I had referenced is a couple of years old. It probably doesn't have Hills impact in it yet, but that might skew it up to 13% on the commercial. I don't know, but I do know
it's not going to be a 20% jump from one project.
I do know that George Brakovich in a quarterly meeting that LCDC had a few weeks ago
Tonganoxie City
Manager, shared that when the abatement runs out in Tonganoxie or when it runs out on Hills Pet Nutrition, their property tax alone, if I understood him correctly, was going to account for 30% of the city's budget. So that's the impact.
Right.
That's the opportunity at that point, hopefully, for the citizens of Tonganoxie to see lower taxes. Hopefully, even within the county will recognize revenue as well. So to that point, there are other tools to put in place. Hills was done, yes, with 100% tax abatement that had a hold harmless in it for the school district. So the school district continued to receive their tax rates. And then Hills pays what's called a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. And I don't know the exact numbers, somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000. So it's not like they just got off scot-free, but they also brought, I believe it was 65 really high-paying jobs into that facility. And then interestingly enough, that business park continues to development with almost the pending opening of DSM, who is a pet nutritional supplier to Hills. So I think Hills Pet Nutrition was about a $450 million investment in the county. DSM's another $60 million of investment in the county. So this is why this type of attraction is so important.
So at one point in your career, you were splitting time between Kansas and Central Texas.
Yes.
And so we talked about different ways cities and communities can incentivize, can grow, right? What did you see in Central Texas that you think could be brought back to the Kansas City metro, but specifically Lansing?
So my specific market area was Austin. I primarily focused on pretty much the northern region of Austin. There are two communities in the Austin Metroplex, Leander, Texas, and Georgetown, Texas. At one time, they were the fastest growing communities in the United States. These were towns that went from 10,000 literally to overnight to 90,000. These are communities or school districts were attracting like 2,000 kids a year. And so just monumental growth. Yeah. The first thing that I noticed, there's two really big things that I noticed in that market, actually three. Texans have very similar values and I think core belief systems and ethics as Kansans. And so I found a really good open market when I was down there. They have embraced density. And we haven't talked about density today, but they've really embraced density, and they've embraced what we would call market rate apartment projects built with amenities, clubhouses, swimming pools, concierge trash service, all of these different things. Some of that is driven by the sheer cost of development today and the cost of infrastructure. So if you can envision, if you have a lot that's 70 feet wide, and in every subdivision, you have a house across the street from each other. So 70 feet of street, 70 feet of water, 70 feet of sewer, all split across between the cost of two lots, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. If we increase that density, for simple math, let's just say we go to a density that then allows 4 on that same 70. That wasn't a good example. So we went 80 to 40. But anyway, you get the idea. Then you're taking that development infrastructure cost and you're dividing it by 4.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you're giving an ability to overcome just what we've seen are just historical increases in infrastructure costs since COVID. And it's just not coming back. And so they've embraced density down there. Honestly, see a lot of really dense single family neighborhoods. One thing that I hope doesn't come to our community, and that was a build to rent community. You are seeing single family communities down there built to rent, no build to sell. They're investment corporation that owns every home and they rent them. But what you're also seeing in those developments is amenities. You're seeing clubhouses, swimming pools, walking trails, nice monuments at the front, little parks and community parks and things like that. And I think that's what makes the density so much more palatable to the people.
Right.
The other thing you see is the market rate apartments, and whether older folks like me or maybe Ken, I think Ken might be pushing up there, we have a completely different reality of what we want as home stock. But there is a generation of home buyers that are not home buyers. They don't want to be home buyers.
Right.
And so they look for amenities in these apartment complexes. And I think we as a community have to embrace that. And we need to look for some developers that would come bring that product, because again, it's not so much about starter home affordability in that case. It's about providing housing. So those are the biggest things that I noticed in that market.
Okay.
All right, we're going to take another short break, and then we'll be right back. You're listening to the Thrive Lansing, Kansas podcast. Harland Russell is our guest. He's the Director of Marketing and Business Development at Atlas Land Consulting. I'm Ken Miller, and I'm with Joshua Gensler from the city of Lansing. All right, welcome back. This is Thrive Lansing, Kansas, our podcast. Harland Russell's our guest. I'm Ken Miller. Josh Gensler is here as well. And you mentioned Central Texas, the Austin area, and professionally you were involved down there. Let's bring it back a little closer to home. How, for those who may be outside the Kansas City area, we in Lansing and Leavenworth County are kind of in that northwestern quadrant. And to our immediate south is Wyandotte County, Johnson County, and of course you've got the Missouri communities, which are east of us. A lot of times I think to myself, it always seems like Leavenworth County is the last to benefit when something big comes to the Kansas City metro. How does Lansing, and I guess to a lesser extent, for our purposes, Leavenworth County, fit into the big picture of the Kansas City metro area?
I've been saying for years that development can only go far south. When you start talking about the inner core of the city, Kansas City, Missouri, and people wanting to be, because of all the amenities that come with larger cities and the museums and the sports venues and things like that, you can only move so far out. And when you look into the Johnson County area, that development has gone so far south nowadays that it's coming back north. And so I think we're seeing tremendous growth in Basehor. And if you guys get out and drive to Basehor sometime and drive around, I think a lot of people would be amazed at what's going on down there. So that I believe is a proximity issue. They're right out there west of the Speedway, west of the Legends shopping venues and some of that stuff coming. Lots of job opportunities that are coming in there. The Urban Outfitters that came in there provided several hundred jobs. So I think I'm not a traffic engineer, and I didn't sleep at Holiday Inn last night. So, but I would say that one of the problems that we do have, and I heard this in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and a gentleman was talking about, they used to take their product from Leavenworth to I-70 in 20 minutes. And I think that was in as early as the mid-'80s. That same trip today is 31 minutes in a best case. So we got 11 minutes that we've added travel time to
Down
I-70,
K7.
down K7.
Right.
And so as a community with Leavenworth and Lansing, we really need to focus on connectivity. I'll be very interested to see how the K5 project turns out, if they're going to consider any realignments of that, because I think, again, that's going to provide connectivity that we need, because at the end of the day, you can have all the amenities and all the attraction you want, but if it doesn't make sense to travel home or to and from your job, you're going to stop doing it.
So we've had a number of hard conversations as a city with our residents, with our council members over the past couple of months, going back a year or so, about what growth really does look like. And we've talked a little bit about this, but in terms of incentives and blueprints for the foreseeable future of how Lansing does incentivize growth and bring growth here, what are your thoughts on that? How would you do it? What would you be considering, and what long-term vision would you have for?
Oh man, that's break out your crystal ball.
That's a podcast in and of itself.
It is.
No kidding aside, keep doing what you're doing. One of the things that I found in the development industry is you don't rest on your laurels at all. There's no time. You take 5 minutes for your success and you move on to the next one. I tell people all the time, the development world is shark-infested waters, and all of your quote-unquote neighbors are vying. And then when I say neighbors, it's like people in the Kansas City Metro. We're all vying for the same project. So you double down on industrial commercial investment to create jobs. We hadn't talked a little bit about that. And so historically, when you would look at incentives and where they would get applied, you would put them in the industrial commercial projects because those, in theory, were the ones creating the jobs. Once you create the jobs in your community, people don't want to drive 30 minutes to work. They want to drive 10. And so then they look at housing opportunities in the community. And then once the housing rooftops get to a certain level, then that hits those demographics for the folks like Panera Bread. And then so it drives the retail. It historically if you chose to incent a retail project and it didn't have the rooftops and the demographics to support it, you were basically giving money to a business owner that would probably operate for a specified period of time because of the incentive. And then when the incentive went away, they wouldn't have the population base, and then the business would go away.
Right.
Very similar on the residential side. Now, history has changed in the last few years, and this is a very relevant topic today, and that's the one of RHID. And so the RHID program, and I don't know near enough about it as I should. I've been trying to brush up on it. It is literally a program that really came to light, I believe, a couple of years ago because some population thresholds were raised that allowed developers to come in and do projects like that in Lansing. So I think when it comes to tools like that, it's really about setting down and having two-way dialogue on what's best for the community and what works for the developer and finding that middle ground. And so I watched with interest the recent plan and we'll see. But I think those are tools, that are in today's environment are going to be to help make things successful. It's so difficult to build a project with no help on that infrastructure cost that ultimately is going to be public improvement. A lot of people don't know that. Usually a developer will build the streets, the sewers, the water lines and things like that, all to the community standards, and then basically give them over to the city. Now, the city takes on maintenance in that respect, but that model's changing.
Yeah, so we do need to be cognizant as a city, or we need to watch out for the fact that there are certain types of growth that will ultimately, on the long enough time horizon, 20, 30 years, it could be detrimental to the city, its budget, its growth, its ability to do things, right? We see that across kind of legacy cities, some of which have rebounded over the past 10 years. I think of Detroit. Detroit was in a massive hole just 10 years ago. And now, because of some things that they've done differently, they might actually be on their way back, which is awesome. But how do we attract the right type of growth that is going to feed other growth, potentially without those incentives? What are your thoughts on that?
Man, I'll probably get a lot of hate for this. I'm not sure we're in a development side of the world that's going to function again without incentives. I know there's single family projects going on out there, but I do think, and this is going to be a double-edged sword, chicken and the egg type thing of what is the proper use of an RHID incentive, for example? It doesn't incent one or two projects to jumpstart housing, and then the city peels back, and then the third developer comes in and he's mad because he can't get the incentive. I mean, at the end of the day, if your market is so hot that you have people coming there without incentives, then those are good days. Right. I just think that there's a lot of going on in the market right now that we have to really kind of consider everything that's at the table. But to your point, keeping the collective best interests of the community. I followed the RHID project because I think there were really two issues there at hand. One, the incentive itself and what that either handcuffing the school district, the community, whatever. We don't need to get into those discussions, but there was that whole element. Mm-hmm. The second element, and I've spent a lot of time talking to people about this because I'm sorry, but in 2025, a starter home costs $280,000. It's going to be 1,200 square feet, and it's going to be built on a slab. I'm not sure how we as a Lansing community can change that. This is a much larger national scale discussion about material costs, labor costs. Now, with that said, to me as a community, we work the hardest we can to get that type of product so that it has maybe some amenities built into it, some trail systems or things like that, so that we can eliminate or alleviate some of the fears that we have of what might happen. But the sad reality is, myself included, sometimes we forget where we come from. I spent, when I first got married, my wife and I lived in a sixplex, and it was multifamily housing that worked within our budget at the time. We bought our first home. It was a complete fixer-upper, and so we spent a lot of money fixing it up. Yeah. But there's a lot of issues at play.
Yeah, and with those type of housing products, it's not, especially the sixplex, is not necessarily something that we see on a regular basis anymore. But those are still those are multifamily, but they're multifamily at a human scale.
Yes,
right.
Yeah,
it's not a 5-story, it's not a 6 or a 10-story building. It's a 2-story building, maybe 3. But even then, you drive down and you look at some of the older Victorian houses in Leavenworth or other places, and those are sometimes 3 stories, right? It's a traditional height, it's a traditional size and feel that doesn't feel like you're being dominated by a steel glass building, and so those things are going to be looking to the past to understand our present and build for the future. I think those are things that we need to really consider about where those fit in, and I would argue that they fit in a lot of places.
Well, to your point, that sixplex is in Lansing, and it's in a residential neighborhood that has all single family around it. It's on the northeast side of town. It had a great sense of community. My wife and I knew everybody in the building,
right?
And so, to your point of human scale, that is the power of some of that. One of the things that I saw in Austin proper was a complete rework of their development code that allowed accessory dwelling units so that a homeowner could rent out additional space on the property. But then, more to that point, I believe they were allowing up to 4 accessory dwelling units on a single family lot. Now, some of those zoning areas were more inner city urban than
right.
we're not talking about going out to, a community in Lansing and doing that, but they had to do it within the urban core because there was only so much property available.
Right.
And so it's a constant balance.
Yeah. Contextualizing the development pattern to the location where it's at. Right. And so that's where the city council, my office, and the developer kind of work together hand in hand to say, this will fit that area.
Yeah.
I think we've talked a lot about incentives, financial and whatnot. What can Lansing do better in terms of marketing and getting eyeballs on us? I think this podcast was kind of born out of wanting to get some more attention for our community about issues that we're discussing. I'm the layman here. You guys are the professionals. In the nearly 20 years that I've worked here, I always saw Lansing as having one arm behind its back because of where we are geographically. Leavenworth to our north, you've got down K7, as you've mentioned. You've got Wyandotte County, Piper. You've got the shopping center. Kansas Speedway, that's been around for 15, 20 years now. We're kind of in the middle of that, but that kind of hurts, I think, when you're trying to attract commercial development. What do we need to do as a city? And I'm looking at myself, I'm looking at Josh, I'm looking at our city administrator. How do we market ourselves better?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. One, I'm going to shamelessly plug Leavenworth County Development Corporation because I am on the executive board still.
As you should.
The city of Lansing has always been an amazing partner to LCDC, and you guys fund part of LCDC. And through that funding, a lot of people don't know, comes a connection to Kansas City Area Development Corporation, which is a regional, I believe, 19-county EDC organization that a lot of leads. And so when we talk in industrial commercial development, we follow leads, and leads usually come in the form of what we call an RFI, request for information. And a request for information response could be 10 pages, it could be 300 or 400, depending on the complexity of the project. That is one of the best ways. And then the other relationships are through the Kansas Department of Commerce. So usually we'll see leads coming to Leavenworth County through KCADC, KDOC, and then directly to LCDC. Occasionally they'll come direct to City Hall, but I think you would admit it's pretty rare.
Yeah.
And so we're at a little bit of a crossroads with LCDC right now. The county has decided not to fund LCDC for 2025. We're funding LCDC for 2025 on reserves that are intended to allow economic development to have some cash incentives to help pay for workforce development, training opportunities and things like that. So we're depleting that treasure or that chest of opportunity. So I would hope that people that are listening to this podcast could understand, based on some of the things we've talked about, the fact that I'm upset that I'm one person of 90% of the county paying the property taxes for the county. Everybody should be upset about that. So from the city standpoint, you guys have been awesome about that. I would hope that people would look in and see this podcast and start understanding that we need to invest more. I mean, LCDC has some great marketing tools. Even better marketing tools we could get to if we just had more budget. And so to that point, when you talk about economic development professionals, the most esteemed, of my understanding, the most esteemed credentials you get in economic development are from Oklahoma University. It's the OU-EDI, Economic Development Institute.
Yeah.
That is significant coursework to get that designation. Our director has that designation, Lisa Hack. And then our assistant director, Diana Dodd, is halfway through that designation. I know of nobody else in the county that has that background. That background brings investment tools, incentive tools, planning tools, communication tools, relationship building tools to that. I think if we're going to succeed holistically as a county and communities in the county, we have to figure out ways to invest LCDC. The other point there is LCDC is also privately funded. We have about 70 businesses in the county, including Atlas Land Consulting, who make significant contributions to the organization annually because we believe in the pulse of what they're doing. Coming back home, just continuing to keep your focus on where is the next infrastructure investment we can make, or maybe you say we've gone down to McIntyre. What offsite improvement? Maybe there's a turn lane needed that the city could start planning to know that when those developments start happening, we know. And again, this is kind of what's a little frustrating about actual zoning, because that's the public notification to the public that the project's going to occur. And fortunately or unfortunately, because I get the public's reaction to that. The public's reaction is, oh, what are we going to do about this, that? Well, this is rezoning. We will answer all that when we get in process. So it's getting into that process and then understanding what are the turn lane improvements. Is there going to be signalization needed? All of these different things. And I think the planning staff, Josh, you and others, just keeping pulse with the developers and what's going on and trying to think about where are places that we could get involved in that entitlement process to make that property even more attractive. Because the developer's trying to do it, but the other thing that does, it shortens the development cycle up. Yeah. Anytime you can put yourself ahead of the competitor, you're going to win.
Yeah. Good thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Where can listeners learn more about our podcast? I was going to go in that direction.
You can go to lansingks.org. If you've got questions, comments, if you've got ideas for the podcast, you've got questions you want us to answer, or try to answer at least, you can email us at podcast@lansingks.org. We are on most of the social media socials, not TikTok, but the other ones I think we are. That's where they can go, Ken.
All right. You've been listening to Thrive Lansing, Kansas, our podcast. Harland Russell has been our guest. He's a former city council member, City of Lansing. He's also the director of marketing and business development at Atlas Land Consulting. Harland, thank you very much for stopping by today. Appreciate it. I'm Ken Miller, the public information officer for the City of Lansing. Joshua Gensler is the community and economic development coordinator here at the city. You've been listening to Thrive Lansing, Kansas. Thanks for joining us.